All right. Well, it's day 5. Can you believe we've already done 4 of these? It feels like we just got back to this.
I know. I feel like just starting to kind of get in that groove again. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion and some of the guests that we have lined up coming up soon.
I know. And I have been getting these comments on YouTube that I haven't had a chance to respond to, but people are just so kind about the need to kind of be in community as a profession. So just love that. Appreciate that. So I have a book to share this morning. If you haven't seen Everybody Looking, what I love about this book is not only that it is a novel in verse and is divided into these sections where you're moving as a reader through this young Black girl's first semester of college. And I read a lot of stuff like that for my new students. And that challenge of moving away from home is exacerbated by her fit with her new college. So it moves back in time to first grade to it kind of like brings you back to how did she end up here while it's moving forward. And I love narrative arcs that blend those two. So not only just a terrific read, an empowering young woman, which I'm trying to create a set of book clubs around empowered young women, but just such a great new voice. So Candace Ilo, definitely.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
So I have been reading. I don't know, Penny, you want to share, have me be able to share my screen here for a second?
Yes. I'll make you the host.
So some of you know that I like my sort of lighter reading is detective novels, crime novels, mystery novels, and I'm geeking out a little bit today because I have been reading. Hold on here. I have been reading one of my favorite writers, Harlan Coben, right, who has this new book called When. For those of you who know Harlan Coben, he's had a series of other books from this, where the main character is this retired NBA player who's a private eye. And sidekick is this guy named Win. Well, now the sidekick is getting his own treatment. And so I've been looking forward to this book for a very long time. It's really, and I mean this as a compliment, it's breezy, it's kind of funny, but the mystery's built. It starts with a murder. It's really, really great. And then yesterday, I found out that Harlan Coben, as part of book tour, was being interviewed by John Grisham, and so I watched a 1 hour webinar of that, which I thought was really, really fascinating because they talked about their writing processes. And you and I had talked about doing a little piece of writing before we came back. If you were with us last Friday, Penny shared a poem, ode to, what was it? Ode to
Cheese fries, I think.
cheese fries.
Something like
And
that.
then we shared an essay called I recommend eating chips. And then we thought, food was such a good springboard to get kids to write that we would go off and write. And so today we thought we'd start by sharing a little bit of that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so it's back to you. So how'd your writing go?
It didn't. I actually sat down on Saturday because we did that on Friday. And Saturday morning, I was like, okay, so you're going to do a food quick write. And I did, in defense of my cupcakes, which are not good for you, not good for anyone to eat, but are so sugary sweet and yummy. And I went, I could do all these different things. Food snobbery is a thing, and I don't make bakery kind of cupcakes. I'm making, crummy little store box cupcakes, but they're so good. How food binds a community. The fact that my son loved them and all of his friends loved them, and so they always were like, Miss Kills cupcakes, you got to come over. But I went back to the essay that you shared and tried to do an imitation. Oh, hello, nice to see you. Have a seat. Let's stress eat some chips together. Was the opening. And I started writing like, let's dwell in cupcakes for a minute. Let's pause. The diver at the end of a surfboard or highboard, the beginning surfer kneeling, waiting for the instructor to say paddle and to feel that. And I was like, this has nothing to do with cupcakes. I don't know what I'm doing. And so after I played with cupcake, portable, small wrappers, so little trash, a few mouthfuls, calories range from, all of a sudden I was just like, "Ugh, this is like an assignment and I don't want to do it." So that's all I wrote, nothing in my notebook.
Wow, that's unlike anything a student would ever do, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Excuse me. So but let's hold that idea and come back to it, because the fact you didn't feel like doing it, I think, it brings an important point that I think maybe we'll touch on. I started the same way you did. I started brainstorming possible topics around food, memorable meals, traditions, like family traditions about foods, like certain things that only get cooked at certain holidays, things like that. I talk a lot about guilty pleasure eating. What would I eat? I got into what would I request if it was my last meal. I mean, that's
Oh,
kind of crazy. Cooking discoveries, cooking disasters, the things you eat for love. I remember when I first started dating my wife, we went to a nice dinner and she ordered escargot, which is not something on this planet I would eat. And I just had to go there. You know, it was trying to be first date impression. And then that reminded me, that took me into, I saw Michelle Obama interviewed this week. She has a new children's show that's about healthy eating. And she was asked on the Tonight Show whether because she's traveled the world and, you know, been around as first lady. She was asked, was she ever served food she didn't like? And she said, of course. And her strategies for getting around it were cutting little tiny pieces and kind of moving things around the plate, which all of that led me to this idea of writing about that, because it took me to, and maybe it's a cliche, but in my family, it was true. You will not leave this table until you
oh,
eat that broccoli.
totally.
And I would be at that table. And so I wrote this piece today about that, in which I'm trying to capture the humor of, I recommend eating chips. And I'm like, hour one, hour two,
Nice.
hour three. And I'm just chronologically capturing my imprisoned times. And then at the end, I thought, I don't know if I really want to go with it as well. And I'll just share one last idea and then we'll transition. Could you share your screen one more time
It's
with
already
me?
shared with you.
Oh, it is. Okay. So hold on, let me pull a couple photos up here. Um,
Huh?
my daughter is very, very into food now. She's a social worker, but she's connected. I mean, we're connected, of course, but we've found this other connection with one another, is that she's teaching me how to cook certain things. So one day she came over and taught me how to make pretzels from scratch. And when I say from scratch, I mean literally from, you know, ingredients that turns into pretzels. And then, of course, as you know, she's doing a lot of work creating cakes. She's very into cake making. And so now I thought maybe I might, you know, write about that, but that's where I left off.
You know what?
But having,
I think,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was going to transition. Did you want to say something about that?
Just that I think it's interesting that you kind of went on this journey with food and you were trying on different topics, but you never really settled into one and wrote a lot.
Mm-mm,
And for me,
mm-mm.
I felt like this was an assignment, and there's a little bit of rebel inside of me that doesn't like assignments. And I don't know if that got in my way. I just couldn't seem to get my teeth into the topic and go, which we've both experienced with so many students. So the opposite of that is, how do we model when something really grabs a hold of us? And and the thing we, I think, both have, you know, really understand deeply from working with so many different kids is that there isn't a writing process that everyone enacts in the same way, and we don't all move through it in the same way. And that when Don Graves and Don Murray talked about just, these are moves that writers make. They draft and they revise, but they never said they had to be in this order, or that all people had to move through them even. You might walk into class and just like know your topic. You don't need to brainstorm. You don't need to pre-write. You don't. And then there are days like I struggled with trying to get my teeth into a draft and I couldn't get there. So I'm going to abandon that. I didn't get to the end of the process. You know what I mean? I abandon it and I go for something else that has more heat for me.
Yeah, I always get a little queasy when I hear teachers refer to the writing process,
Mhm.
right? The steps of getting from A to Z in a piece of writing. I mean, we all probably, as you said, we all go through certain steps, but it's the sequence and the readiness. It reminds me a little bit yesterday when I was listening to John Grisham talk to Harlan Coben. Grisham said that when he writes a novel, he massively drills down and creates this incredibly detailed outline. So before he begins writing, he knows he's going all the way from A to Z. And as he said in the talk yesterday, if you know where you're going, you're not going to get lost, right?
Mm.
But that's a very different process than Penny Kittle's process, for example,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I interviewed John Irving for the summer book club for Book Club Foundation the first year we had it. And he talked about this meticulous process of laying out on index cards all the way to the end of every novel he's ever written, including writing the last scene before he's even created the rest of it, so that he has this very clear map. He said sometimes it took him a year or more to create the map for the novel of what were the twists and turns. And then it was just like a task: sit down, write that scene, and move through it. And I think that what we want to happen as teachers is that everyone could kind of move at the same pace. Like that would be lovely because then all my students would be ready for this, but they're not. And Murray always said the process is dependent on your audience, your familiarity with the topic, the kind of work you need to do to excavate the topic, the kind of surprises that happen during the draft that make you veer off. But all of those things are individual to the writer. So how could we determine where every writer is all the time?
Yeah, and I know we've had this discussion before, but I think about way earlier in my career where okay, this week we're writing an essay, and on Tuesday, Monday's the pre-write, Tuesday's the draft, Wednesday's the continue the draft, and you're right, it's a one size fits all for a process that's artistic, a process. You wouldn't have every painter paint a painting the exact same way at the same time. But it creates a real problem, I think, a management problem for teachers, because, we feel the pressure of the time. We're spending a week on this, and at the end of the week, thank you, I'd like everybody to be finished. But as you know, it doesn't work that way. So how do you find peace with that?
Yeah, I don't know that there's actually peace. There's a continual struggle. And I liked how what Newkirk kept saying in our piece yesterday was that you have to get into fiction to understand the problems and the concerns of writers in that genre. And so that's what I see as happening here, is that we have to be writing and in it in order to understand that. And when we understand it, then we make better moves as teachers. So it doesn't mean that it makes it easier, but it does make more sense. And so I put together really quickly some of the ways I worked through a topic myself. And I don't know if it's going to be helpful to people, but I thought I would just show it to you all. I took a Phil Kaye poetry class. Okay. And can I just say, that was kind of like a major thrill for me, because he is one of my favorite spoken word poets. And he had a class advertised on Instagram. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I get to work with Phil Kaye. Well, there were 18 of us in the class. But I think so much about Doris Lessing's idea that there's a storyteller inside of us. So it doesn't matter if it's poetry, it doesn't matter what the form it becomes, but that this idea that our stories recreate us and that, we are most creative in composing these stories of our lives. I just loved that. So his idea in his
Wait,
workshop,
can you stop? Can you stop just for a second?
yes,
Because I think you said something real quickly, but I think it's a deep thing. And that is, no matter what form it takes, right? I think sometimes when we think, okay, we'll let kids tell our stories, that we always have to think it has to be an essay, when it might be a poem,
yeah,
or it might be a photo essay. I don't know, that there are different ways for that storyteller in us to emerge. It might be digital.
right, right. And in fact, um, if we imagine that story is a way of thinking, as Tom Newkirk said in Minds Made for Stories, instead of a genre, if we just know that story is part of how we learn and how we create meaning in our lives, then it really isn't about the genre. But in this case, he asked us to start with memories. And I think of this picture of my sister and I a lot because we're 5 years apart, and you can just kind of see that she's already tired of me at this toddler age. But he said that we should start by writing the first thing that comes to mind. And so he started with these simple things. He said, what songs do you remember? Think of yourself in childhood. What did you see outside your window? What kind of objects come to mind? What was your worst hairstyle? What outfits did you wear? Think of memories specific to 10 years and younger, and then preteen. And then, sorry, I went right by that. Preteen, I can see myself as this 10-year-old who climbed trees and went to brownies and played with their dog. And he said, then high school, then older than high school. And once we'd made these lists, and this was like, 35 seconds for each category, he said, time is short, so you don't overthink this. And then he said, it's like Lego pieces dumped on the floor. Grab one memory that's buzzing with potential. And I went to the 10 years and younger and went strawberry picking. And he said, and then you just start listing details. And so he extended the prompt. What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you see? What do you touch? Who are the characters? And if memory were an object, what would it be? And then this kind of amazing idea, if you had a fortune cookie that you cracked open in this memory, what would the fortune say to you? And that stayed with me, like, what an interesting way to think about ending. And so I just pictured myself at 10 running down the middle of the street trying to get to the bus. So I'm writing this all over the page and just as fast as I can, just like I would in class, changing things, working with it. But he said at the end of this, he gave us, 5 minutes to kind of flesh it out, which is just the first little couple paragraphs on this page. And then he said, now you have 30 more minutes and then you're going to share it in this group with Phil Kay, who I think is like a genius. And I was like instantly like, oh, brother, right? I'm going to like disappear and not come back. But that pressure, the pressure of time, meant that I started trying to figure out what I was going to share. And he said, 30 minutes goes pretty quickly, doesn't it, when you come back? And it did. But because I had to read it, I could hear my words. And you and I have spent a lot of time putting kids in writing groups. This experience of reading it out loud was huge. Even though I had this stupid cliche ending and I didn't like the piece, hearing it, I heard it differently. So I'll just end by saying that because of it, I went back to it. I was rereading it like, I don't know, a few days later. And I didn't know there was another moment connected to the strawberry picking. And I was in the middle of working on something else. So I just turned my notebook sideways and wrote about a bad part of the memory. This being violated by at 10 years old by this young boy who sticks his hands up my shirt at a softball game. And it was the same kid I'd, been watching in the strawberry fields. And all of a sudden, this became something else instead. It was like all of a sudden I went, whoa, I have a whole nother part to write. And when I wrote that, I began making it into one poem that makes this dramatic turn. And eventually, here's draft 6, because I printed 5, sent it to you. I sent it to Linda Reef and Georgia Hurd and Tom Romano, some of my writing buddies. And now where it's at is I have this better draft that I am recording, and I'm turning it into that digital story. When you said, what form will it be? It's kind of a poem, but it's going to be, I've done the voiceover and I've begun to collect photographs, and it's going to be something else entirely. And I guess to me, it just feels so limitless, right? When I'm in control of my process, I can do whatever I want. I can keep working on this poem and no one will ever read it or care. And I find satisfaction in that. Do our kids get that opportunity?
No, the answer is no, they don't. When I watched, and I haven't seen these slides before, so a few things came to my mind. Number one, that 30 minutes, I love that, like and I think you had mentioned this last year when we talked, this importance of outrunning your fear. Like on your mark, get set, go. You got to get words on the page, which is why a lot of times when I was in a classroom, like if I knew we were going to be writing this, literary analysis essay for the next week, a lot of times I would lie to my students and tell them it was a timed writing. And so we would do a timed writing on Monday, and then I'd give it back to them on Tuesday and say it's not a timed writing, because you got to get them out of the gate, right? Try to get the words on the paper. And I also love the idea that, two other things. Number one, I love the fortune cookie idea, although I'm always annoyed when fortune cookies don't give you actual fortunes. But I thought that your that fortune cookie idea is brilliant. And then again, a reoccurring theme that we've talked about a number of times, and that is you wrote to a surprise. That writing took you to a surprise. And that only happens if kids write and write and write and write and write. And that only happens if you don't grade everything and don't read everything, right? And so the tension is, how do we create the conditions that generated genuine involvement in a system that really kind of fights against that at every way possible? And I think, the things that we've always talked about, volume, choice, don't grade everything, get kids to seeds that they're interested in exploring, are part of that answer.
And the other part is modeling, right? Volume, choice,
yes.
modeling, and feedback. Because the model, as Greg said, why would anyone want to write in the first place? I think that if I show this to my students in the fall, they're going to be like, whoa, right? That's a reason to write. You find stuff you had no idea was there.
Yeah. And it means something to you. And I'm not going to grade it, and I'm not going to have, I don't know. It really, that's the hard part, right? Is structuring within a structure of trying to remove some of those structures that allow kids to. We've had this discussion in workshops where we talked about reading, right? How do you become an engaged reader? It's not through worksheets and packets and answering teachers' questions. But so, it's that trying to get to, I want to come back and talk about this maybe later, this idea of how do you set up a semester, like, as I said in one of the earlier sessions, rethinking of what a semester might look like, and how do we set it up in a way that, creates these conditions. I loved what you shared today.
I just think that the thing that I remember is that I have many, many days like the cupcake writing, where what I wanted to write just didn't happen. And I just abandon it in my notebook. And there has to be a place where kids abandon stuff that's not working and start again, which means they aren't going to stay on our schedule. But if you're working towards a portfolio and you're not grading everything, you're allowing space for kids to find that.
You're allowing kids the space to move away from performative writing and engaged writing. And I think that's something we could come back and look at sometime.
Absolutely. Well, sounds like we have used up our time today. And tomorrow, don't we have a guest tomorrow? I think we do.
It's pending. So we won't announce yet at this point.
That's right, because there may be a change on that schedule, but we have planned, I think we have 4 or 5 signed up already. It's exciting to plan ahead, and we just wish you all a fabulous Tuesday.
Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you all again tomorrow.
Absolutely. Bye.